welcome to the Pennsylvania Chautauqua's Hall of Philosophy. We're grateful to the Chautauqua Foundation for hosting our lectures as part of their cultural series each summer. And I'd also like to thank Citizen Strout for his support of our lecture series, along with some of our other seasoned sponsors here. I'd like to mention Purpose One, Visual Marketing Group, the Mount Greta Arts Council, the Rodney G. DeHaven Fund, the William Drindle Endowment of the Mount Greta United Methodist Church, the Rosemary Beck Foundation, the Thomas A. and Georgina T. Brosseau Family Foundation, the Golden Foundation sent us some pain, which was nice this summer. I should also just mention that it is a big year here. It's our 10th anniversary, which is huge in my mind. 10 years. Can you believe it? Everybody's jaw dropped when we did the math earlier in the year. And it's we've been one of the most rigorous and focused painting programs ever since that founding year, attracting students from around the country and across the globe. It's been a rewarding thing to reflect on. And one of the other rewarding things that, I get to meet all these artists that come through. That's the big perk for me, not only the students, but artists that I admire from afar on the internet or maybe seen shows here and there. Mark Brosseau, who's here with us today, is an artist that I've known since we moved to Lancaster. He reached out to Heidi and I, and we got to know him through a mutual friend, Barbara Brosseau. And we've been good buddies with him and his wife ever since. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mark before he comes on up here. Mark is equally drawn to color, science, math, and emotion. Mark discovered art by way of chemistry and architecture after graduating from high school in Linden, Vermont, where he was born in 1976. He entered Dartmouth College with the intention of pursuing studies in chemistry, which shifted to architecture, where a drawing class changed everything, introducing him to the world of creative exploration that fuels his passion and intellectual curiosity today. Mark graduated with honors from Dartmouth in 1998 and then earned an MFA in painting from the University of Pennsylvania in 2001. He followed that with a year of painting and printing in Iceland as a Fulbright scholar. He's had 14 solo shows, the most recent being Far-Fetched at the University of St. Mary in Leavenworth, Kansas in 2020. His work has been featured in numerous publications, including American Paintings, Art Forum, the Philadelphia Inquirer. Currently lives with his wife and 2 dogs in Greer, South Carolina. One of the founding members of Tiger Strikes Asteroid Greenville and a 2019 recipient of the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant. So I'm happy to welcome him to our lecture.
All right, thank you. There's some of my work in this talk, but I'm actually more interested in talking about looking at painting and how I experience painting. As Jay mentioned, I did a Fulbright in Iceland right after I got out of graduate school. And I got my Fulbright with the same body of work that actually got me put on probation in graduate school. I've been kind of getting hammered about putting content in the work. I've been making these abstract paintings. I was like, content. I love film noir and things like that. So I started reading Raymond Chandler and making these paintings with people drinking in bars and things like that. And it was a lot of red herrings, and I wasn't really actually interested in subject matter. So I had a mid-year review my second year. It was horrible. I got put on probation, but I had already applied for a Fulbright with those paintings and got a Fulbright. So that was a little bit of a little text going on in life. But it allowed me to go to Iceland and sort of reconnect with what I really cared about. And it's there that I discovered that I'm really more an investigator than I am a storyteller. I had started with an interest in chemistry, and I was still interested in one big experiment. And so in Iceland, I sort of realized it was a new kind of space for me. I'd never experienced that kind of space. There's There's nothing in the air. Everything like looks plastic. You know, there's no atmospheric perspective at all. Everything looks right off in your face. And it's lava fields and volcanoes and rifts where tectonic plates are separating from one another. And so just kind of being in that experience made me think about space in a new way. In 8th grade, I was in my science class, and the teacher was talking about the Big Bang Theory and how the universe is still expanding and making space for itself as it went along. And I was like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense. So I raised my hand and I asked him where the space came from. And he just, because I couldn't fathom this void that was just there, like waiting for stuff. It didn't make any sense. And he just laughed at me, and then he wrote down that, you know, that question on the part of the board where students said stupid things and had it recorded for the entire year, and I didn't get an answer. And then I realized, like, that's actually what I'm trying to answer in making paintings. Where does the space come from? And the reason that I choose painting to do that is because I don't know another way to create a space that's never existed before. You're taking a two-dimensional surface and you're making a space. We're actually creating space. And so, and that's when I started to realize, like, our view of space and paintings was really limited. Like, we were treating it as landscape or interior, always trying to kind of put those constructs on it instead of actually just experiencing the space that was there. And also, like, space is lived in and felt. It's not something you look at. And so now I really try to approach paintings thinking about how I feel them and how I live in them as opposed to just looking at them. So the first thing I started to do is just think about different kinds of space. Like, the space is an experience. What does that mean? Like, how am I going to communicate that? And so I just started, like, I would think about a temporal space. And I would just write it down just as a note, like, I thought about this. And it kept going and it kept going. And I like thinking about spaces that were active as opposed to acted upon. Like, if it was a displacing space, how is that different than a displaced space? Like, there's a difference there. I don't know that I know the answer, but I was thinking about it. And then the other thing I was thinking about was sort of like, I like the idea of the atom, like, you know, our current model of the atom deals with these orbitals where there's a probability of a location. Like, you can't actually locate an electron. We can only kind of think where it might be a certain percentage of the time. And so, like, the universe is sort of that way as well. Like, we're getting images back, but that was millions of years ago. Like, who knows where that object that we're getting images of is now. And so just thinking about space in a way where I can inhabit it, I don't know everything about it, I'm there and dealing with it. And then going about looking at paintings that way. And then another experience, there's a lot of paintings from the Phillips collection in here. Apparently, Duncan Phillips and I have the same eye or something. I remember looking at this huge Gardner painting of Bonnard's in the Phillips collection. I was probably with Jay, actually. And I was standing there kind of feeling my way through it. And all of a sudden I realized, like, that table in the lower left sort of was like telling me I couldn't stand where I was standing. Like, in feeling my way through the space, it kept making me move. It kept making me adjust my position. Like, no, that's not where you're allowed to be. Like, that's my space. And so, like, that just felt really powerful, that this thing that was created 100 years ago at the time, like, was actually, like, getting up in my business and making me move. Like, it wouldn't let me stand there. So I had to keep sort of figuring out where I was supposed to be. Then I started looking at this Van der Waal drawing from it. And I mean, I think Annunciation paintings are crazy, because if I'm married and an angel comes down telling me, like, I've never had sex, but I'm going to have a baby, I'm like, whoa, what? You know, hold up for a second. So I've always been fascinated by Annunciation paintings for that reason. Like, the subject matter is just crazy. But then I'm drawing from this painting and I'm starting to realize that there's a twisting in the space. And it took me a long time to realize, like, there's two different perspectives going on. On the angel, the perspective goes up above the horizon. She's from the sky. And over on the side of Mary, everything converges into the ground, into the earth. And so the artist is creating this twist there. And it's really subtle. Like, it's not a huge difference, but it's just enough where I'm like, oh, as I'm drawing and feeling my way through it, I can start to feel the painting twist. And then it's even more bizarre because I feel like the figures are twins here. So, and then he'll do things like this little still life here. And I keep drawing from this painting, and I sort of would love to see it because I wonder if there's actually like writing on the book. It's just, there's so much here. And then back to Bonnard, who he'll like that other one we looked at where he made me move and change my position. Like he'll consistently sort of do that with you, like invite you in and push you back, and invite you in and push you back. And these Bonnard, for those of you who don't know, he would make these little drawings, usually in like a day planner. And then he'd go back to the studio and he would staple up unstretched canvas, and then he would start to make these paintings from those drawings. So in a lot of instances, the color, while informed by real life, might be really sort of exaggerated or even just made up. And so here, with this painting, like it feels like a straightforward kind of like terrace genre scene, basically. But if you start to look at what this tree is doing in relationship to what's going on around it, it's like it goes into the space, and so it wants you to come in. But then the figure's there, and so that's telling you no, you can't come in. And the table's there, and that's keeping you out. And so then the tree keeps going in, and then up here it starts coming back out, and so you get this whole like I'm going in, no wait, I'm coming back out. And it just keeps doing that over and over again. And then you get this real disconnect with the space on this side and the space on this side. So now it's actually twisting as well because that sliver on the left wants to like push out. And so then that wants to push me over here, and then the bench is telling me, no, you can't. And so, I mean, I've drawn from this painting quite a bit, and that's where I really started to figure out like this tree, you know, it holds a position in space based on what's next to it. So like against the table, it kind of goes back. Against the figure, it comes forward. Against the sky, it comes forward a little. It kind of keeps undulating in and out. And that was kind of the experience in Iceland. Without atmospheric perspective, you're just dealing with color. And so I would be walking down the street and notice like the sky against the building, and there'd be a spatial shift that wasn't expected. Like the sky was coming up a lot closer than I would have expected. The same thing happens in this Bonnard, where it, you know, it wants to invite you in, like you've got the bathtub here telling you, hey, come on in, water's fine. You know, there's a friendly dog. But then at some point, because, you know, there's no perspective here on the floor, it's just a pattern, it's a flat pattern. And then she's leaning so forward, I feel like I'm going to hit my head on her if I actually try and enter that space. It's like, it's a big tease in a way with Bonnard all the time. And it's just the color, it's just. And then this is one I think that I saw with Jay somewhere, maybe the Met. And this painting like doesn't do so much of the invite you in. Like I feel like I've definitely kept that distance in this painting. It's keeping me out. But then this table is always fascinating. From drawing it, I realized that it's the same table, but again, he's sort of controlling the way that you're looking at the painting. You know, over here, I'm looking in that direction, so that's how I see the table. Over here, I'm looking in this direction, so that's how I see the table. And so he starts to fold the space by doing that. And again, there's a little bit of a tease, like, hey, can I get out here? Can I go and like inhabit the room behind this woman? But there's just no way in. I mean, this kind of drawing just would go on forever. It's like I'm changing it. And so I spend a lot of time drawing from master paintings, trying to understand what the artist has done in the space, like what kind of formal decisions are being made, so that when I go and make my own paintings, I can maybe learn from them. It's a conversation. Basically, I have teachers from throughout art history that can share their information with me. This painting, I spent a lot of time with. The story of Susanna the Elders, I'm probably going to butcher it, but Susanna was bathing. These two monks found her and were sort of overcome with lust for her and said that she needed to sleep with them or they were going to tell the city council or the mayor that she had been meeting a lover out there. And that was very bad for her. But she refused and she went to town and lo and behold, they did say that, she was out there having a tryst or something. And she was going to be put to death. But the wise ruler, who I can't remember who it is, it might be David, I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, was like, well, this doesn't sound right. Something's not right. And then sort of realized what was actually going on. So this painting, like the experience it's one of like being a voyeur or being stalked. Like she's being followed, she's being watched in a pretty hostile way. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what about the painting, like what kind of decisions has Tintoretto made that do that. Obviously there's, obviously the figures are doing that, like the figures are watching her. So clearly there's a narrative here that's contributing to that, but something about it spatially feels the same way. This is one where I've spent a lot of time with. Jay and I saw this painting in person in Boston, and I think we were the first people. It was Titian, Tintoretto, and Veronese. We were the first people in the museum or in the show. We were sort of just able to keep ahead of the crowd. But it's one thing to draw from a projected image or a book. But being able to actually draw from paintings. It's kind of fantastic. So I was just here just trying to figure out the relationships, the size, the scale, the sort of major moments. And then I've gotten more playful with it. These are done from memory, sort of like trying to remember what kind of formal elements are in the painting. Obviously that wall, that head is always there. And so these are just like little extrapolations trying to figure out what about the space of the painting creates a soft experience. And then I did a large series of drawings from this painting as part of an exchange. There's something about the relationship of that light triangle of her against that dark trapezoid, I guess, that really creates that kind of experience where the way that this trapezoid twists the space towards that light image of her puts across that this is like a voyeuristic stalked situation. These were fun to do. So this is a painting that I'm thinking about now. Mostly, I haven't actually done any drawings from it. But I've done this exercise called Baxing with some classes where the idea is like everyone in the room would get a master painting and they would pair off, and you have to describe your master painting to your partner who hasn't seen it using only like formal terms, no figurative elements. So you try to describe this without saying draw a sword, sort of trying to figure out what kind of geometric or shape relationships are involved. So, I would always start with this big framing element and then this diagonal. And to me, it's that diagonal there that really creates kind of the violence of the scene. Like diagonals are really energetic. They're really aggressive. Horizontals and verticals are pretty stable. Diagonals always want to like charge a situation. And so to have this entire painting built around this diagonal and intensely kind of charges the scene. Here's a Cezanne from the Phillips collection. Someone argued that it's unfinished. I always feel like he kind of got to a place with this painting where the space started to do something separate from what he was expecting. Like he was just working from observation, moving things around, and all of a sudden there was like a resonance that he didn't expect. And he didn't know how to make it, like he didn't know what to do. I mean, I think it's perfect. And so it becomes about instead of being about recreating the landscape, it becomes about the experience of being out there, what that kind of situation is like. And here's another painting from the Phillips, this little rider. So there's a density here in this space. Like there's an ambiguity in a density that doesn't come, it's maybe deep, it's maybe not, it's hard to tell. And so you're sort of existing in this mysterious place of unknown. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, a good 40% of the painting is a large dark shade with no sort of discernible things. But then you get this bouncing, like this kind of mirror right here. You start to get a little back and forth, which creates the vibration there. And so with these Justin drawings, which is, I think, one of the things I've been thinking about the most now, sort of similar to the Cezanne for me, like he's feeling out the space that's in the paper, like he's feeling out that space that he's created using the ink and the line. And I feel like these can be slow and meditative, but probably that's my feeling. He's probably like, similar to the Cezanne, like each mark is almost like it's like he's a surveyor, kind of like out there with his pole getting GPS readings, sort of, and really like trying to map out the entire space. And so, like with all of these things, I really don't want to think about like the pleasure of the eye. Like I want to think about like if I'm in there, what's this feel like? Like there's a space there, so I can inhabit it. What's that feel like? And so then here we get sort of like, to me, this is kind of like we get the Bonnard and the Cezanne and the rider all in one painting. You get that ambiguity of the rider. Is it deep space? Is it shallow space? It's hard to tell. There's mystery. You get that feeling touch of the Cezanne. And then you also get that dance that the Bonnard will give you. Like, I feel like there's a way to enter here. But then that green kind of wants this green and this red want to keep me out. And so then I touch another area, see if I can enter. And then you start to wonder if you can go around it, get in behind and enter that way. But then this feels pretty solid, and then maybe there's a gap here. So keep just sort of touching and pulling back, trying to feel my way through it. This is also the Phillips course. And then these Gorky drawings, which I've always loved, and I also saw these with Jay in Philadelphia. This is probably my best museum experience ever. There was a Gorky show at the PMA, and there was a huge snowstorm one day, and I had planned on going. I think probably 18 inches of snow overnight, and I called the museum. I'm like, "Are you open?" And they said yes. I'm like, "All right." So I got to the museum, and I was the only person there. Except for it was me and the security guards. And so I had this show to myself for like 2 hours. I was ready to stay all day. At noon, they were finally like, "Hey, we got to go home." No one's here. And these drawings, I think they were my favorite part of the show. And they're landscape drawings, I guess, but they're still really about his experience of being in that space, in that landscape, and feeling his way through. And I love them because I feel like they're made with Crayola crayons. So, in some ways, like this is similar to the Bonnard, who's taking his little drawings and extrapolating the color from those, whereas he's out there and kind of the extrapolation is a little bit more immediate. Like he's taking elements or feelings of being out there and extrapolating on the spot in the drawing and creating this new world that's informed by the one that he's in, but it's that space that he's in with his internal space sort of melding together. And here's a little Demuth watercolor that I've been in love with ever since I saw it at the Phillips collection. And here you get this weird idea of suburbia to me, like the density where you think like you move to the suburbs out of the city because you think you're going to have more space, but really it's still pretty packed and dense, and your space is very limited. And so I feel like that's what he's got here. Like he's got the hint of nature, but really like the living space is all condensed and packed and geometric and controlled. So then from DMIT, I go to Celia Rising. Celia was my first painting teacher. I know she's been here a number of times. She's an artist that lives outside of Philadelphia. And they look like pretty straightforward paintings of the suburbs. Like that, she paints her neighborhood of the main line. But they're so, I mean, to me, they're so weird. And they kind of capture how weird those spaces are. And if you're ever lucky enough to like go on a tour of the parts of the like city that she's painted, like they really look like this. And so she's, you know, this strong diagonal, it's really aggressive, but you think of the suburbs as like a calm, peaceful place. And then there's, you know, you get all these repeating elements, and you feel like you have your own thing, but it's all kind of the same. And then she'll let you in. She's very controlled the way that she lets you in. And then the one thing that I really, really love about her paintings is that every single part of the surface is considered. Like there's no part that's not important. So even the sky, it's like very important to touch every single square inch. And so she's gifted with this eye of being able to notice these things. And so like this, like how crazy is this scale of this little shed to whatever this is, to that house? Like that's insane. But having been with her, like that's what it actually looks like. And so by making these paintings, she said it was sort of call attention to just how bizarre the space is. And then, I mean, I look at these trees and I think of the Bonard with the purple tree that turns at Bernadette. So here, like this is almost like the Bonard bathroom painting, where letting you in at the bottom, kind of, but then I feel like those trees just want to come down and engulf you, swallow you up. But when I look at the sky, like I think about that Cezanne painting, where really touching, it's subtle, but touching every single square inch from me. And again, just weird, like this scale shift is so bizarre and intriguing. And then getting these moments here, these shapes that want to kind of push out. All right, now I guess I'll talk about my own work. So these next two came right after my situation of being put on probation. I hadn't actually gotten a Fulbright yet, so my mind wasn't as screwed up as it was going to be. But like the crit was bad, and I didn't know if I should drop out of school. I didn't really know what to do. So I was responsible for the model sessions, the life drawing sessions. And I just decided that I would go, and I brought gouache. And, you know, I had to really figure out what I cared about in order to keep making art. Like, that was the only way this was going to work. And so I just sat there and I ignored everything I didn't care about. If I found a moment that I thought was really interesting, I would mix the color and I would put it down, you know, relative scale and location to the other things I was putting down. And so, like that Cezanne, they started to kind of create their own space for me. And at least, like, that was something that I could get excited about. And I didn't have to paint all the stuff that I didn't care about. Like, I didn't care about anatomy. I didn't care about 99% of the stuff in the room. There was just these moments of color that I cared about. And those are the things that I wanted to paint. And they started to create, like, I think this, in retrospect, is when I really started to get interested in space again. And so then I started making them separate from the source, sort of like the custom drawings, thinking about just trying to feel out a space that was there in the paper. And then at this point, I'm in Iceland. So I'm thinking about what kind of space is it? Like, this is a shifting space because I feel like the space is constantly moving. And something's already started to happen here for me where I'm getting a little restless, agitated, because I feel like in order for something to really be good or have the potential to be good, there's got to be pretty high stakes. And which means like the chance of failure has to be high. Like doing this, like putting colored shapes on a white surface, it's going to make space and it's going to be attractive. Like there's almost no way to fail. And so I started to really sort of get restless with this idea. The other thing was I really wanted to control the reading. Like if this was a shifting space, that's the only reading I wanted people to have. And that is just ridiculous and impossible. I can't. All I can really do, to use that word is to help me make decisions. But there's no way I can control what people are going to bring. So I had to get out of the studio and do some other projects while I was there. There was this television room. Iceland, the really wonderful thing about the light in Iceland is that the sun goes way up and comes way down. There, the sunlight slowly comes over the horizon, goes around the horizon the entire day, and then slowly goes down. And so you get this wonderful raking light all day. And so I made these window screens and just to see what I could do, like with the sunlight projection. And I was able to create this space with just sunlight that hadn't existed before in the space of the room. And that felt exciting. And then one day it snowed. Reykjavik does not snow that much. I think the rest of Iceland snows. I grew up in Vermont, so this was none. So there was about a kilometer-long driveway to where I was living in Iceland, and we had this fresh snowfall. Just a few cars had gone by, and so it kind of created this canvas, basically, that was a kilometer long on snow. And I had some food coloring, so I decided that I would go out and just make a painting in the snow. Sort of thinking about what kind of experience that would create in the actual world. Like, would I be able to create another sort of space? And fortunately, I documented it right away because it rained overnight and stopped. And fortunately, I used food coloring because we were in a pretty fragile area. We were right on the ocean. Okay. And so then here, this is the last painting I made in Iceland, and I'm already sort of starting to get that idea of, well, if I put colored dots on one surface, it's going to make space and it's going to be attractive. Like, what happens? And the world's kind of like drawing me back. And so, jump forward a few years, and the paintings have gotten more playful. They're more connected to the world. They're more connected to what I'm seeing. I'm still interested in this idea of making these experiential spaces. But taking elements from things that I've seen like this, here, the frame comes from a Byzantine icon that I've seen at a show at the Onassis Center in New York. And so I was trying to create this space that felt pious, like it felt full of faith, it felt devoted. And, it does bring a little bit as an interior. As I said, like I sort of gave up on the idea of being able to control things. I just wanted that impetus to sort of like guide me in how I made a decision. This painting was really difficult in coming. I sort of used that frame again. And then this had sort of resolved itself, but nothing else had worked. I couldn't figure out how the rest of the space related to what was going on in the middle. And then ultimately I decided that it didn't relate. Hence, this is an oblivious space. Like, they're not communicating with one another. They're just kind of ignoring each other. This is also sort of where I first realized that sometimes the best thing to do, like if you get stuck, the best thing you can do is the most ridiculous thing possible within the world that you're creating. And so for me, like, I was stuck and I'm like, well, all right, fine, I'm going to put a golden sawtooth at the bottom of the painting. avocado root zigzag and see what happens. I feel like that's how like Tom Waits writes a lot of the songs. What's the most ridiculous thing I can do? Then it's not, I still want the world to be quote unquote believable. So I have to kind of use that as a context, but so I'm still making the paintings based on, trying to think about inhabiting that. This one's denser. There's not a lot of space for you. There's a little space. This one, I think, started with like this. I pulled from a tendency and seen it the time. I wanted the space to feel lush and kind of a little bit ornamented, but kind of shallow at the same time. And then this, this was the Tom Waits moment where I was like, I'm just going to put a big like medallion on me, because I don't know what else. This is a tacky space. I like the double. My wife is a writer and an English teacher, so we like words a lot. And we met because Hellfire was our favorite book, both of us. So we like wordplay quite a bit. So tacky is such a great word. Like it's garish or campy, but it's also like sticky. And so this painting, I wanted a space that could kind of convey both of those things. And so that, sort of determined the palette, but I feel like I could exist in the space and there's room, like I can kind of push my way through it, but I'm going to come out like covered in these orange burrs or something, like they're going to kind of glob onto me and make it difficult to go through. Here's my little try to have a Bonnard moment where I'm like, oh, there's space back here, come. But trying to keep you out at the same time. I spend a lot of time just looking for tools that will give me a different surface or a different mark. Like anything that I can use to create a shift in the space I want. So like spray paint was a revolution, like a revelation, just because of the different kind of marker I could get. And give me the opportunity to create atmosphere in a way that I couldn't have before. And I'll do a lot of things with matte versus shine that don't come across in digital images very much. This painting, I wanted the idea of these things, like I wanted the space to have the idea of these things that were somewhat related, but just dealt with completely differently. So I've got, these framing elements that are trying to communicate with one another, but are failing at that. And then I've gotten kind of fascinated with the idea of the other place, like not where you are, somewhere else. And so for some reason, I call them phallic boob mountains, have kind of come to symbolize that idea of the other place. This is actually called toxic, not tacky. I was thinking a little bit about the DeLillo book, White Noise, I think the middle chapter. It's called The Airborne Toxic Event. I wanted this feeling, the space that felt like something was kind of maybe impending doom, but maybe controlled at the same time. The drawn version as well. I wanted this space to feel like it could grow, like these forms could be a lot smaller or they could be a lot larger, but also confined by in this case, it's the borders of the painting. This space, I wanted it to just feel more. Or that it wanted more, not that the space is more, that it just wanted more and more, and we keep sucking it in. This painting, I wanted the space to undulate, both in and out, up and down, like in every way possible, but not in a regular way where you can just sort of ride out the undulation comfortably, like it would be kind of an agitated undulation. And the part I got the most excited about was these sort of little ellipses that start to want to remove themselves from this, like they become implied. Like they almost finish themselves. And when they do that, then they start to like remove themselves from the rest of the painting. Again, with the mountain. And again, with the mountain. Here's a drawing I did from observation. Sort of, I run a drawing marathon at a local art center in Greenville. And I created this a still life that would fill this room basically. Like I've got every single school in the building, put them together, and people would come draw. And so I just wanted to draw from observation, but see what would happen. Like at what point would something trigger in the space of the drawing that I could kind of go from it. It happened like right here, where something started to go. I kind of got excited and the drawing started to make its own decisions. Or I should say the space of the drawing started to make its own decisions. And the drawings have become kind of like the paintings are very, or have been very planned and layered and kind of, I don't want to say restricted, but really just orderly. And the drawings have sort of allowed me to kind of break that up a little bit and be more intuitive. I like sort of not knowing where the edges are, kind of like figuring out where the ends of the space are. And then these have most recently sort of fed into these large scale acrylic silk drawings. So they feel different and the same. Like I'm still thinking about the space, I'm still thinking about being in there. It's just a little quicker, I guess. And then this is my most recent painting, which actually is the first time where I feel like the drawing and the previous paintings are starting to come together. Like there's still kind of a planning and layering, but there's an intuitive element that wasn't there before. And in making this painting, I was very aware of like, I'm going to put everything in the center, put the focus on the center, which is, your teacher would tell you never to do. And I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do. And so this painting was actually, Greenville has this thing called Flat Out Under Pressure, which is a 24-hour painting competition. Like you go to the art center Friday morning, they stamp your surface as registering it, and then you take it home, and then you have to bring it back 24 hours later. So that's how I made this painting. It's like, I'll just do it. But I won 4th place, and it's going to be reproduced on a recycling bin downtown. So I'm going to end on that moment of triumph.
Yeah.
How does the scale of the actual piece affect the way that you interact with the spaces that you create?
That's a good question. I mean, projected, everything looks huge and like, oh yeah, I could absolutely enter it. And I think ideally everything would be kind of large just so that it would have that human scale. But I actually like working really small. And so I guess that kind of presents a challenge. It takes a little bit more of a mind to like, oh, I need to like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids myself before I can actually enter the painting or something. It took me, my rectangle at this point tends to be a 4 to 5. Like that's, like I figured out that is the proportion that I really love. But the scale thing is still something that, because I also love making like little 4 by 5 inches paintings, and then that's impossible not to treat as an object at that scale. But there can still be a space in there. And so I'm actually kind of interested in that duality at that scale, but the big acrylic on silk ones were fantastic to work on because it was like this, like the Bonnard, like garden painting in the Phillips. It was this thing that I had to deal with like life size, like, oh, I actually could be in that.
Right. I was wondering, you talked at the beginning kind of about the use of
diagonals to create movement within space. And so I was wondering, especially as the work continues, kind of how you use different diagonals in the competition or create movement in your pieces.
So it entirely depends on what kind of feeling I want from the space. Like it's, working abstractly, it's really easy to sort of like start making design decisions. Sort of like, oh, I need to balance this or something. And to me, like that's the most arbitrary reason possible to do something. Like, I'm not trying to make a good design. I am trying to make a space that's never existed before. So it's always about how I want the space to feel. If I feel like I need to activate it in such a way, then I'll look for a moment to use a triangle. Triangles are very much. I'll look for a moment to use a triangle or a diagonal. But if I feel like I need to calm it down or I want it to be more subdued, then I'll be focusing more on kind of horizontals and verticals. Does that answer your question?
How do you find that time affects the pieces you're working on? And just
the food coloring around snow and the sunlight, they were kind of non sequiturs. Like I had the studio work going on. I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a day to do these things. And it was kind of nice to think about like, oh, I only have a day to actually take away from this other stuff and focus on that. And then this is just it's a false constraint. I don't know that it would have been any different. I know that I don't pull all-nighters regularly, so I think actually the amount of time spent in the painting is probably about the same as it would have been if I hadn't been kind of trying to compress it into that. And I can like, thinking about a question of like, where does the space come from? Like you can end up spending like paralyzing yourself into like philosophical thought and naval gazing pretty easily. And so kind of having, and maybe actually this is something I need to do for myself, having that deadline of like, okay, I need to just like make decisions to get this done, really made a difference. But a lot of times, I don't know if you've heard the story about de Kooning, like someone wanted to film him painting. And so like film crew came in, he had a big canvas up, and for like 8 hours, he's just like mixing paint and like putting down strokes, mixing paint, putting down strokes. Like he never stops. All activity, all the time. And the film and like the director's like, oh, this is amazing. It's wonderful. It's great. And then they leave. And then the director comes back a couple of weeks later and it's like, hey, where's the painting that you did for us? And he's like, what? It's like the painting that we filmed you making. And he's like, oh, that was trash. I had to get rid of it. And he's like, you put all that effort and energy into it. And he's like, that was for you guys. I don't paint that way. He's like, you see that chair? I sit in there and I look at the painting. And then I'll get up and I'll make one mark. And then I go back down there and I sit there and I look at the painting. And he's like, you can't film that. It takes like forever. So there are times where the space like doesn't really, because I really don't want there to be arbitrary decisions about like, oh, I'm making design decisions. That can take a long time sometimes to really be able to feel it. And it means that I have to have a lot of things going on at once, usually.
You're online. I've got a question. Carol, how do you determine what colors you want to use in the placement?
I mean, I would say that my color sensibility is intuitive. Like I don't put that much thought into it beforehand. I've kind of been getting worried that I'm like drawn to too many kind of pretty color combinations. And so now I want to start using poop brown more or something, just because I don't want to have that crutch of like, oh, I'm making pretty paint, pretty colors. The feeling that I want from the painting usually tends to determine the colors that I use. So like the painting Pious, which is that little one with the blue and orange frame, like that yellow sort of felt like kind of a divine glow to me. And so that's how I chose that color. And then the placement, it's entirely about how I want the space to move. So if I want something to really pop, then I need to look at what's going on around it and get it to pop. And this, like, there was a pretty conscious decision to have that kind of blue and muddier orange, knowing that the blue would sort of make that brown look more orange and create a little bit more agitation there.
I have a question. So I was thinking about the myth, whether or not it's true of the painter who works outside. And I hear this a lot. It's in the lore that the abstract means sort of owes a big debt to the desperation of trying to capture all those rhythms outside without the time and contemplation of the controlled studio space. And then I'm thinking about space is kind of this elephant in the room for every student that walks out into the landscape for the first time. They're looking at everything but the space. And then you're talking, so I'm getting my thing is, we were talking earlier about the idea of drawing or space making decisions for itself in the picture. And that kind of sounded a little spooky to maybe some people. And so what are you doing? What's that about?
So that's a good question. And I think actually that's part of like what our seminar is about. We're reading, for the seminar students, we're reading the image, which there are parts of it where really sort of question, like, what is the actual role of the artist? Are you just a medium? Or, I mean, where does the individual come in? Like, where does Will come in? Like, for a person like Ella Hoffman, she would say that she was entirely like a medium. She would have seances and meditate, and something is moving through her. I think that. I think I wouldn't go that far. I think I was just looking in that drawing, which I think you're referring to, like, I was just looking for a situation where by working from observation and drawing it, I picked up on an anomaly, I guess, that I got really excited about and could start to create a new space separate from the source. And so I was still actively involved, but it was through the act of like measuring and paying attention to what was going on, also noticing the shapes that were relating to themselves in a way in my drawing that wasn't actually the quote unquote reality of the situation. Does that make sense? There's moments like where like you're decooning, you're looking and you're deciding, and you're looking and deciding. So I'll be looking at the painting, I'll be like, okay, I want the space to do this, and so I'll make that decision. And you go back and forth, and you kind of get into this zone. And then at some point, something starts to happen in the space, and I can't actually recognize why it's working the way it's working. And I call it like a Wile E. Coyote moment, where like you've just been chasing the roadrunner, and he's gone off a cliff, and you've just been so focused that you don't notice that you followed off the cliff. And as soon as you notice that it's no longer sustainable at that point. So I find that what happens is I got to a point that's like 6 or 7 steps beyond what I know about making that painting. And so at that point, I don't know how to make decisions anymore. So I have to put it away until my knowledge or experience catches up, and then I can look at it. I'm like, oh, that's why it's working the way that it's working.
So in one of your responses just now, you described making a pretty painting.
I don't know that it is a crutch. It's just like when doubt's a part of being an artist. And so I just like, when I see that I'm using like bright paint over and over and over again, it's like, okay, am I doing that because it's going to look good? And I'm keeping myself from finding like a different choice or like, is it a tendency that I need to be aware of, basically? Because if it is, then there's probably something that I'm doing it because it's a tendency, not because it's the right thing for the painting at that time. And so I just want that awareness of like I want each painting to be a different experience. I don't want to just make a product. I'm happy making, like, if I make a pretty painting and that was a painting that I was supposed to make, I am thrilled. But if things just are coming out pretty because that's what I'm doing and not actually being really specific about each decision, then that's something I need to be aware of. Does that make sense?
I took a two-dimensional design class in college a long time ago. And we talked about negative space. Have you heard of negative space? If so, how do you treat that?
I mean, to me, it's all space. Like, so absolutely, I've heard of negative space. I don't think about it that much because I don't think about having a figure ground relationship in my work. And that to me is when negative space comes in. To me, like they're all environments. And I would say that I want the negative space to be just as activated as the quote unquote positive space, so the object space. Like I want it to push on what I guess you would call the object, or like the negative space is actually what really sets up the environment. And so in that way, to me, it's almost more important. Like it's what's giving you the feeling or giving you the experience more than like I hate saying objects as well. So, but it's that environment that I really care about. And so that I would say I almost spend more time thinking about the negative space.
I was wondering on the themes for creating them.
All right, so this painting in particular, like there is an entire painting underneath that bottom half of ochre. And it just got to a point where I wasn't getting the feeling that I wanted. And so, it's a leap of faith, which I've talked about with the seminar class again, like to think like, okay, well, I got to do something. Because I guess there's failed paintings, but to me, they just need to be worked on more. One thing I never do is I never turn the paintings. I know a lot of abstract artists will rotate things. To me, like this is the space that I created for myself. Like this is the way that the painting is going to go. And so I probably shouldn't. Maybe I should add some in progress images of this one. But there's a lot under it. So yes, I am willing to completely obliterate it if that's what the painting demands of me. But it's always your moment. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mark.